This is Family Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Bridget Cook-Burch. Welcome to the Family Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you. I'm so honored and delighted to be here. I can't wait.
I want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see that icon up there says listen on Newsly. For our audience, if they use the coupon code GHOST, they can get 1 month free premium subscription on that platform to listen. We'll be on there later tonight. We also have two of your URLs listed here. They're not clickable, but when we're published, they will be. Yourinspiredstory.com and SHEROESUnited.org. Again, those will be fully clickable when we're published on the platforms. Also want to let people know that we're actually at episode 992 of the podcast, getting closer to episode 1000, tracking that on Apple Podcasts since 2016. And this episode, we're going to talk about belief in the power of your story to change the world. So we'll actually put the links back so people can reference that. And again, welcome to the podcast. Now, just to give a background for people, your work has been featured or showcased on Oprah, Dateline, CNN, GMA, History Channel, NPR, People, and many other places. You're the CEO and founder of yourinspiredstory.com. And you also are executive director, former executive director of SHEROES United. So just given that kind of background, and maybe I don't know where you want to start with the audience and telling your story.
Okay. Well, I think especially for your audience, because I've had so much fun going back through your previous podcasts, and I love how you you seek to really inspire artists. And so I think one of the things that we could begin by talking about is passion. When you have a passion for something, when you want to create, when you have a purpose behind what you do, it's like it can be all encompassing and eventually will direct you on the path you want to go, especially if you keep your dream sacred, I have found. So when I was young, I was an avid reader, like all the time, nose in a book. I was a tomboy too, so I'd spend time outside. When I came inside, if I could have my nose in a story, I would. And stories took me all around the world and outside of this world into other places. And I absolutely loved it. And I remember being young and sitting under a tree, and I had read The Diary of Anne Frank. And I felt so brought into her situation, circumstances, and stories. And I read some other stories as well. And I thought, would I have the courage to do something when I got older? Would I have the courage to help people who were being trafficked or enslaved? Would I have the courage to hide someone behind my walls? Would I have the courage to take a stand when a stand needed to be taken? And stories would give me, a little bit of that courage where I could see myself through someone else's stories, way in advance and choose if I would make that choice in my future. And lo and behold, later on in life, I had the opportunity to start working with high risk youth and gang kids in Denver. And it was a really difficult time. But I'd had a near death experience where I changed the story I was telling myself. And then I got to watch as some of these high risk kids, Phantom, they were changing the stories they were telling themselves because they were having new experiences, and they came from all this, high pressure, very violent lifestyle, gang related, and didn't have a lot of support at home, but they began to make changes in their own life. And I fell in love with the human soul, and it sparked a passion and a purpose. And I began to see just how important stories are on the planet, and to be able to see this firsthand. So I transformed. Like, if you would go to my website, you'll notice my logo is a flame, but it's really a phoenix rising that's kind of disguised in that, because I transformed. I know other people can too. And thus began my journey of telling transformational stories where someone may have gone through the depths of hell, but they come out on the other side and they share with us how they did that and how they rose from a victim to a victor. And each and every time I've been so inspired, and I get inspired at my retreats by all these authors from around the world who have enough courage, not just to tell a story, but to take a stand. And sometimes it's fiction, most of the time it's nonfiction, but that little girl with a passion and idea, I've been able to have come out into everyday life. So for those artists of you out there, it's like hold that dream as precious and keep on practicing and keep on creating and don't let your dream die.
Yeah, what we find with a lot of people that we've talked to, and we've talked to, you know, as many as we have over the years, is like limiting, like self-limiting beliefs, like really stop people from expressing, or the idea, well, I can't be an author because I'm not Stephen King, or I'm not Ernest Hemingway, so I can't even do it. Like I can't be a filmmaker because I'm not Hitchcock and I'm not, you know, at that level. And so a lot of people with music too, until you get, you know, into experimental and kind of punk aesthetic music or even hip hop, where it's like, hey, I don't have to have a 5 octave voice. I don't have to go through the hit machine. I can express myself because I have something I want to say. And
Yeah.
that's where I kind of started the podcast, was with emerging and independent artists, primarily female artists that I didn't think were being paid attention to. And that's how I started back in 2016, because I had this mission. It's like love a lot of these female artists that were like Riot Girl, and they were also like they kind of more of a punk aesthetic, but trying to express themselves in a way challenging the guys. And I
Hmm.
thought that it was interesting to talk to people like that. And so then it evolved to be more expansive, to say, well, if I'm talking to a musician, I can talk to an author, I can talk to a poet, I can talk to a photographer, I can talk to somebody who's creative that created their own company. And so that's where my mission has kind of been out there, to explore in a longer format the stories that you're talking about on the pen, but kind of going back to the oral history of, like, if you can talk to somebody, that can have an impact, even their voice carrying this story that's beyond the page. And so I totally understand where you're coming from, because I think that that's been my mission in part.
I can tell. And part of the reason I can tell is this is episode number 992. Like holy cow, most people don't make it that far. They lose steam or momentum or passion, and you obviously haven't. So that's beautiful. You're nearing 1,000 episodes.
Yeah, we do about 20 a month. That's how we do it, because we just, yeah, I have a passion for it. You know, I have a day job. I'm a software designer and I'm a musician. And then I'm a podcaster. So why are you so busy? He said, well, I find that, you know, I'm a cancer survivor. My backstory. When I was 27, I had a level 3 sarcoma. I had all these limiting beliefs about, oh, I was too scared to be at the mic. I was too scared to be in front of people, too scared to travel. Once I survived cancer, I said, well, why should I be scared of anything? And then I started challenging those things, and then saying, well, why don't I tell stories and then find other people who tell stories? And like, music is part of that. Like, if you're a songwriter, you tell stories, and you usually try to put yourself in the character like an author does, and do a story in a song. It's not always about you. It's about somebody. It might be another character. It might be a piece of you that you put into a character, but you're trying to kind of reflect real life, a lot of times. And that's how I got the strength to figure out that I don't have to have these limiting beliefs. I can get past the glass ceiling.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I love that it took something hard, not that I would wish that on anyone to have to overcome cancer, but cancer in your story was your antagonist. It was the battle you had to fight. It was the thing you had to overcome. And then when you did that, you take the step out of the dark cave and you say, "Hey, I don't have to live in this fear anymore. I'm going to be more visible. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to tell other people's stories." Like that's tremendous. And so some people who have cancer, they'd be like, "Well, I just overcame this, so I'm going to take it easy for a while," but not you. I
Yeah,
love
I
that
mean,
you're
I
out
went
there.
to I lived in Japan. You know, I got married. I have, you know, I did things that I didn't know if I could get married. And we had a kid, and then we went to Japan. We lived in Japan. When she went to preschool, my daughter went to preschool and kindergarten in Japan. And my
Oh, that
family was totally dead set against it. Said, we just survived cancer. what are you doing going all the way to Japan and we can't see it? It's like, well, you know what? It's something I want to do. It's on my bucket list. And I got it. I got the opportunity to do it. So it's like, I can't limit myself because other people want to limit me. I was already limiting my own things, right? So I said, I think a lot of times people want to be perfect. What I found is you got to be kind of present. And there was this thing that Herbie Hancock and talked about when he was working with Miles Davis. He made a chord mistake in a live performance. He thought it was like the end. He's going to get kicked out. And then Miles actually took that moment and changed the song. And then Herbie says this, it's a kind of famous quote. He's like, then I learned, to live in the moment. I learned to live in that, kind of be able to have that agility to be present and understand that it doesn't have to be perfect. It is what it is in that moment. And I think that stops a lot of people. A lot of people I've talked to, like the podcasters that stop in 15 podcasts or 10 because they don't get the number they want. It's not perfect. They don't hit their expectation. But part of it is just being present and doing it because you love it. Like I do it because I love it. It wasn't because I wanted to get to this X or Y or Z. I just like the conversation.
Oh,
And
that's
so
beautiful.
that was the main. That's why I still do it.
I love that story about Miles and Herbie. Like that is phenomenal, and that you have continued to do that. You want to hear a funny story?
Yeah.
Because I love to teach and I love to speak. It's part of what sets me on fire. I really enjoy it. And I was asked to MC a particular huge women's group that was taking place. So it was this whole symposium, and we had two television personalities that were coming. So one was from Channel 5 and the other one was from Channel 4, and they were both quite famous in our region. And one of them I had to call out. I kept, trying to get to him because he was supposed to be in the vendor area and we needed him to come make an announcement. And then it was my turn to announce another gentleman who was going to be on a panel, and I mentioned the wrong news channel. And the
Oh.
whole crowd just went, whoa. And I thought, okay, that's
Yeah.
it. I'm done. I'm not going to be able to get out
Yeah.
of this one. And then all of a sudden I started laughing and I said, well, it's a really good thing that this is the Success Through Failing Summit, isn't it? The whole crowd just erupted. And there were so many women that talked to me out in the hall, and they're like, I didn't know how you were going to recover from that. And I'm such a perfectionist. Like, I get scared to death that something like that will happen to me. And you
Mhm.
just took it and ran with it. In that moment, I was like, Herbie,
Yeah.
going along with
Fusion.
what Miles was able to create from his mistake. And so I just think that's lovely. That's a perfect, perfect example.
What's like a fusion moderator? It's like how do you recover? Because a lot of people they get on a diet. There's a 10-step diet. They mess on step 3. Got to start all over again. Mess up on step 7. Got to start all over again. So there's a lot of problems, and even in music and in writing, people want to be perfect. I'm a
Hmm.
big purveyor of the happy accident or the flow state, kind of like trust yourself. I can write my bars on paper and plan it out and make it perfect. But what I find is a lot of times if I do something free form, I do it in a flow state, it's better than anything I tried to design. Most of the time, if I do something free flowing and I trust myself because I've been playing since I was 17, I'm 56, that it usually comes out better because there's this stuff in my subconscious that you kind of connect to that muse, you live in a moment, you kind of let the world flow through you. And there's a lot of famous artists that used to talk about this, from authors to musicians. Hendrix used to talk about how he could just let the universe had to talk to him and he had to just put it out. And the example there is he was working with one of these groups he was working with. I think I don't know which one, but it was like he was working on the Chitlin Circuit. He's working behind one of these real big bands. It wasn't Little, it might have been like Little Richard, and he decided to put out something that wasn't the song in the recording studios. And Little Richard said, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "Well, it just came to me, and the universe gave it to me. I couldn't let it go." You see, some people just aren't confident enough to do that. You have to kind of be able to riff on things and accept things, or even know when you need to riff on something and be comfortable enough to do it.
I would agree. And, you kind of mentioned something about, the universe. And I feel like we're all divinely connected. And, if we allow it, if we allow the muse, whatever you want to call it, to be able to flow through us, to be able to create from that space, it does, it lets go of perfectionism, which is poison, and it actually creates more of that openness where there's that free flow of ideas and connections, something unusual. And in writing, we really want that because we want something unique. We don't want to have the same voice as everybody else. We want to be able to rise above the din. And when we're passionate and open, I feel like that's when we can be really powerful in what we create.
So, deepest, you have a question you like to answer is like, what is the deepest need that any human has? And what does story have to do with it? I can kind of suspect, but like, you can tell me.
Well, the deepest need that any human has is to be significant, to know that they're wanted and needed by somebody on the planet. And for artists, that's kind of 10,000 fold, because there is a desire to be seen further and acknowledged and to be celebrated. And so that's a really important thing for everyone to recognize. But it's also really important to recognize that the act of celebrating someone else opens up possibilities for you. And it's one of those magic wand kind of things that instead of being in competition or comparison of another artist, because you were talking about that, like when we go into those spaces, it's imposter syndrome when we think, oh, I can't be powerful, I can't do this like she does this, or this best-selling author, or I'm not a J.K. Rowling. But when we celebrate others' success, all of a sudden it's like pop, the ceiling breaks down, and we're able to say, wow, there's an unconscious part of us that says if they can do it, then at some point I will be able to do that too. And so I think instead of being afraid of that need for significance, it's important for us to embrace it and just take it as the part of who we are. And then to add the celebration on top of it breaks most people out of imposter syndrome and out of that perfectionism to where they're able to express their own unique voice, which, as you know, in songwriting and music and artistry and in words, it's important, and it's beautiful when someone can find their voice and be unique. So be significant by owning it, and then allow your uniqueness to come out as well. Even if it's a nerd, it's wonderful.
Well, I think a lot of people are so scared to tell their story. They think
Mhm.
their story has to be like Taylor Swift's story, or like Stevie Wonder's story, or like Hendrix's story. They say, well, why can't it just be your story? And when I talk to like a young musician that I work with as a producer, a lot of times they'll come to me with something that's cloning whatever is popular.
Mhm.
And I'll basically go to them and I say, I want to hear the song that you're scared to show anybody, right?
Ooh.
Because I want to know who you are. I don't know. I want to know that you can copy Beyonce, you can copy Taylor Swift, you can copy all these people. I want to know the song that you're that you're most scared of that you've ever written. That demo is what I want to hear because I think that's where I want to work because I just want to make it sound better. I don't
Mhm.
want to turn it into a Electric Ghost song. I'm Phantom. I already have a style. I don't want to turn it into my style. I want to hear what you have and make it better by
Mhm.
just making it sound better or taking your ideas and basically allowing you to understand that you're actually the one that's going to do it. I'm just going to facilitate you becoming your actual, your authentic you, which is sometimes not what people do. People want to go and turn them into them or into somebody else.
Mhm. And how powerful that is when you tell them, share with me the one that you're afraid to. I bet 9 times out of 10, that's where so much of their gifts come out.
Yeah, it's like where everything is. That's where I find that a lot of people like when I've talked to people who are like life coaches, how they became a life coach is they came out of their own trauma. They solved their own issue. And
Mm.
then they decided they want to be teachers, they want to be empathetic, and they want to actually use their story and listen to other people's stories, kind of like what you're talking about, is being able to be in service of other people and not just yourself opens up the doors. And when you're like in a musician and you're kind of in that teacher role, it's not your song that's important, it's the other person's song. It's the person.
Exactly.
So that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to bring out that person. And that's not always what people want to do because it's just self-interest. You're like, well, I want to make it mine. That's the kind of base kind of human behavior. Is like, I'm going to make it mine. I'm trying to get me number one, me, mine. But it's hard to get past that sometimes. And that's where I think you're saying that if you go past that, you open up, you can have a lot better experience on the planet.
Yes. Oh, I would agree 1,000%. It's like we're all on this hero's journey, and we have to plunge ourselves as the reluctant hero and from the ordinary world into the extraordinary world, and we battle with ourselves as well as other people or other situations and circumstances, the tests, the enemies, the allies. And then when we go back from the extraordinary world into the ordinary world, like we come bearing an elixir of life. We have a gift that we can share with other people. And so, if someone's more narcissistic, they will make it about themselves. But man, do I see these beautiful heroes and sheroes that as they rise beyond victim of their story and rise beyond their story into victory, it's like I have something significant to share and I want others to benefit, right? I don't want them to go through as much pain as what I did. I want them to know they're not alone. I want them to know that they have every grit and determination somewhere deep inside of them and that they can pull it out as needed. I want them to know that they can be successful and on their own terms. So it's such a beautiful thing when someone truly conquers that character arc. And that's when I can tell, like, those are the stories I love to write myself. And they're also the stories that I love to see just being developed in my authors. And I know, wow, they know their rise because they know what their gift is to help other people now. And wow, you can really tell a person who has gone all the way through that journey. So
Well,
I
it's like
love that you do that
the,
for yours.
well, it's the transformation. Like I think it's all about transformation, kind of reprogramming. Because if you've got this kind of limiting belief from childhood, your inner child, and you were told you weren't good enough, or your parent didn't love you, or you interpreted that your mom or dad didn't love you, and then you didn't think you were good enough, then you have all these glass ceilings you put on yourself. And
Hmm.
it's like you might think the world stopped, things like you're the one that stopped you the most. Like the person that actually is usually preventing you from getting where you want to is the person in the looking glass. And it's like I love
I
the
like that.
Victorian poets.
Oh, go
They used
ahead.
to talk about the looking glass all the time. Like if you read a lot of the Victorian poets, like Wordsworth and Tennyson and Blake, there's a lot of references to the looking glass. And the
Hmm.
looking glass is kind of putting this like where they're looking at themselves and they're seeing that they got all these like hidden versions of themselves or like masks or limitations and they're scared and there's fear. And when you start to dive into that and say, well, why is that? And can I reprogram myself? Can I actually get out of that loop? And I think that's where these major transformations happen when people start to realize that they can transform for the better. They don't have to be in an endless loop.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you've probably seen, because I'm sure that you did some transformation early in life that helped you to get where you are today, but you've probably gone through several iterations of yourself. And I know I did, like with my near death experience. And then a few years ago, I had an author who, as a thank you gift, she gave me a DNA kit.
Oh
And she's
wow.
like, you're always telling us to dig deep on your stories. And she knew that I'd been adopted when I was 6 months of age, and I'd had three sets of parents by the time I was just 6 months old. She's like, I don't think your story is going to be complete until you do this. And I just got to tell you, I was terrified. Like, I never wanted to hurt my adoptive family because I adore them and they were amazing and they still are. And so it was like, I was so terrified. Like, I've stood on the doorstep of a killer and never to interview him for 7.5 hours, by the way. But I was never as terrified as to just spit into this little, dispenser
Yeah.
and to put it in the mail. And I found that there was a time I was hiding behind other people's stories for a while. Like, I would celebrate them like crazy, and I still do. But I hadn't taken that full leap into my own story. I hid from that childhood trauma, as you were talking about. And I just kind of pretended that it didn't exist anymore, but it wasn't true.
Hmm.
So all of a sudden, I found 89 new family members after being a secret for more than 50 years. And
Wow.
so there was like this whole new adventure, this whole new lease on life. And I have all these new brothers and a sister, and all of which I absolutely adore. But it's pretty funny because my adoptive brother, he was like, I went to tell every member of my family just privately and quietly because I didn't want him to find out another way. You're a public figure, people out in social media and things. And so
Hmm.
I'm carefully going. And then my little brother's like, feels like you're really joyful about this. And I'm like, little grin. I'm like, I am. And he said, who are you to contain your joy? And
Oh, yeah.
this is like out of the mouth of babes, not really. He's my little brother, but out of the mouth of babes. And I thought about that so strongly. Like, who am I to contain my joy? This was this was divine providence. This was a beautiful connection and continues to be. So I think you're right that you know we go into the dark cave. That's another alliteration of the looking glass. Is we go into the dark cave, and we've been fighting these battles, and we've been blaming everybody else for the bane of our existence, and then we look into the mirror, and the dragon that's in the dark cave is us. It's us. And like you said, the fears, the iterations, the demons, it's what's within us. And so what matters is looking in that mirror and accepting what you see there, and still choosing to take a step out of the dark cave, still choosing to be on your path, still choosing to move forward, and then to create something absolutely glorious with it.
I think it's also what people forget is like they think there's going to be this magic moment, and they think that, like, to me, like you're never done. As a creative person, I am continually pushing the limit, right? So like there's a limit of what I can do easily, and
Hmm.
then what I find more interesting is to push into areas I don't know how to do,
Yeah.
and that means I'm going to continually have to learn. Some people are scared of that experience. They'd rather stay in the comfort zone of being in a niche of exactly what they're comfortable with. And then it's when you kind of at the bleeding edge or the cutting edge of things, you have to push. Like in my software job, I have to continually relearn, and whatever I knew 5 years ago doesn't work. What I knew 6 months ago doesn't work.
Mhm.
We have to continually iterate, and we can't just rest on our laurels and say, well, I knew this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Yeah, I can use it as a base, but everything is changing so fast, it's exponential. And so I find that even in my creative work, I try to push it. And that is something that you have to get used to, because I think people don't want to be uncomfortable.
Mhm.
But to
I
me, it was more
would agree
uncomfortable
with you
not to
on
do
that 1,000%. Like, we don't like to be uncomfortable, and yet it is that step out of our comfort zone that first faith comes, because you're not full of faith in your comfort zone because there's nothing to have faith for. So you got to step out of it. But then that unknown is actually where so much creativity lies. So I would agree with you 1,000%. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. What were
it.
you
No,
that
no.
final thought?
I think the problem I have today is like I have a lot of tools, and I'm kind of an old school person. I actually use like real keyboards and synthesizers and analog stuff. And there's a lot of
Beautiful.
tools today where you don't have to know how to play piano or guitar or bass, and that's fine. There's a lot of artists that get out there and they didn't have a traditional background in music. But the problem is, like, there's a lot of people just they take a sample and just take something that somebody else did and move it around, and then they take AI and get a prompt, and so there's a lot of stuff that's just it's just like, okay, you're good at production, you're good at taking things and kind of figure out where they fit like a puzzle, but it's not the same as somebody that actually does something from scratch, like take a bass and play it for 5 minutes and let the microtonal errors be there and let the micro second timings be wrong. That takes like courage today, because like today is like, well, I can just let the computer do it and it'll be perfect. But what
Mm-hmm.
I try to point out to people, if you listen to something from the 50s or the 30s or even before all the computers, there's a human factor in music that makes it feel authentic because there's a real human being playing that instrument. And I
Yeah.
think the same thing can happen now if AI writes your story
Oh,
or
can I?
AI writes your bass line, AI does the script for the movie. Is that really is authentically human as a writer writing it or an actor playing it, not just this AI bot replicating the voice of an actor and using it. So I think we're in an age where people was like, yeah, I can make something perfect, but does it have any feeling? Does it have any significance? That's
Mhm.
where I
And
kind of look at
is it perfect if it doesn't have any feelings, if it's not a significant creation? They did some studies several years ago where they took computer generated music and then human generated music, and they played them both to audiences who didn't know what they were doing, but they were bored by the computer generated music, and they were enthralled and inspired by the ones with all those, like you said, the micro mistakes. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of publishers are way up in arms about AI produced books because, if anybody can go do that, is there art involved? And of course, it can be argued on both sides. AI could enhance or it can help to edit or it can do different things. But I would argue that in that creative process, if they rely on the computer and not their own artistry, they would miss a Miles and Herbie moment. They would
yeah,
miss what it's like to be, have something stuck and then have that beautiful aha moment. Or as you mentioned, the happy mistakes, right? That actually created something of great significance that, create a career, that create a different move, a different movement, just all kinds of things. So I'm with you on that. I think AI has a lot of wonders to it, but I would suggest to young artists and older artists is do not let that be your crutch because it can cripple you.
yeah. Because I think a lot of people today, if they think about it, I was just talking to people about music from the '70s and just looking at the top 10, top 20 list of the top 20 songs from the 1972, 73, 74, and then you look at today, and then you look at the lyrical content, you look at the musical content, and I'm like, is anybody really going to remember this like they remember that song from 72, 73, 74? And
Right.
the really heart of it is the fact that the singer songwriters were allowed to be very artistic. They're allowed to have songs that are longer than 2 minutes. They're
Hmm.
allowed to have songs that actually say something that is personal, right? They usually tell a story. That though, if you check in those the history of those that time period, is a lot of singer songwriters telling stories that are very emotional
Yes,
and
very
kind of
deep and motivational too. Yes.
yeah, bearing like an authenticity and an honesty that
Hmm.
is the human experience, rather than trying to have a beat or a hook or the melody line that's memorable, like a jingle for Madison Avenue. Now you can make a lot of money making jingles for Madison Avenue or making hooks that can be repeated in reels and clips and shorts. And that's kind of like the problem in our industry now is that just because something gets a billion views doesn't mean it's good.
Right.
It just gets a billion views. But people are equating it, well, that's artistry. It's not necessarily the artistry. And so that I mean, like if people feel like, well, I don't, the song that has the heart pangs, that doesn't get the number. Is that not important anymore? So
Right.
that's why I kind of get worried is like is the people are going to learn a lesson of the number matters more than the heart of it. So if you get more views and more, it's all about that. It's not about, and so then people don't get supported and you don't get to hear. And this is again why I'm on a mission for independent, emerging creators across the board, whether
Mm,
they're musicians or authors or poets or personalities, people that I think people need to hear, and not just some top list, not just based on a list, because a lot of people
right.
want to
And
just run that.
not just based on a formula either. That boring
Yeah,
formula of, hey, if you do it like this, then you're more likely to be played in a club or more likely to get, on one particular billboard, more likely to make money. But as you said, does it make the other music not as important? And are we losing something in our culture because of that drive towards the formula for success and money?
yeah, because I mean that's what the problem with AI. Like if you think about books, if somebody gets a formula and they get big numbers on a
Mhm.
top 10 list, then suddenly then it's going to change the whole dynamic. Like, well, you have to do that if you want to be a bestseller.
Right.
And it's happened to music a lot where like it doesn't actually ring with the kind of heart pangs. Is like, is that really telling that story the way that song from the past did? Like even some of you go from the 30s or something, you would listen to vinyl from the 20s in the 30s, and you're like, wow, there's so much, and there's a lot of mistakes, but there's
Hmm.
a lot of heart. And so it's like to me, it's like you got a lot of kids today will go back and listen to vinyl, and they're like, oh wow, there's something about this stuff that's different than the today's stuff. Like, yeah, it's not just the crackles, it's the intention of the artist. It's like
Hmm.
what were they willing to do, and they weren't so into perfection. And I think, like you said, perfection could be the enemy of creativity.
Oh yeah.
Because I've run into a lot of people, they'll do 100 takes on something, and really, if you listen to the third or fourth or even the second, very early takes are actually better, but there might be mistakes. They might
Hmm.
have not had the best mic, so the vocal isn't as great as the 100th version. They might have made a small microtonal mistake, but it actually sounds so much better. I'd rather take that take. And
Hmm.
in the past, people would, but today they tend not to. And so that becomes the problem to me going forward if you're not willing to allow the imperfection.
Yeah. Oh, I love this conversation because when I'm teaching authors, like at my writers retreats, one of the things that we love to do is left brain and right brain work. And your left brain is where the critic resides. Like it's not perfect enough. And who are you to write a story? And you couldn't spell a word to save your life, right? So it's like the ego talking. And the right brain is all the beauty and the creativity and those emotional points and other things. And there's so much to be said for that, but you got to have both. So you lead people on a journey with the left brain. You make sure that there's some structure, but then you have those juicy stories, not built into some formula. Like you can have some structure, and that's important. So you have structure, but then the juicy creativity is where your voice comes out. It's where it makes your story different. I tell people because that imposter syndrome comes up so much. You could
Yeah,
have 25 people in a room and tell them, hey, I want you to write a book on leadership, and everybody be like, because there's so many books out there on leadership, but everyone would create something different, especially if they weren't comparing themselves to anyone else in the room or what's already out there. And they said, if I was going to write a book on leadership, what are the stories that have propelled me forward in life and made me take courage to take a stand and these other things? All of a sudden, you would have 25 uniquely different books. Just like you take 25 musicians in a room and you tell them, give me that story that you, or give me that song, that piece of work that you've never dared to share. all of a sudden all this genius and other things come out. So I love that we're on the same page in terms of the uniqueness, the individuality, the creativity, the it's just so needed in the world right now. I think in music
Yeah.
more than any other time in our history since the 30s is really needed right now, and people love fresh, but we forget about that when there it seems like here's this formula for success. But people do, they love fresh.
Well, I think it's like the holistic method or the Socratic method. Like when I went to college, I went to a school called Bowdoin College, and we had at the end of the term we had blue books, which means my professor wants me to put in my own words the concepts that he was teaching. And it
Mm,
wasn't just multiple choice, like A or B. It's I put into my own words exactly what I was taught and show if I understand how to put that in my own words, which I think is actually the right way to get your brain around it. Because then you actually really learn it.
yeah.
Because if you just remembered A or D or E, did you actually remember what did you actually answer what the professor just asked? Right? It's kind of like if I go into a session, I say, you know what, you got this down on tape, just go and do it live. Just play this live right now. Just play it how you feel right now. Just put it down. And you don't have a lot of time. Just go. Just we're just going to put the tape on play and just play it. Now we compare it to what you actually spent a lot of times constructing, and then look at what you just did in the moment. Now
Hmm.
part of what you constructed we might keep, and maybe it's better. But a lot of times the thing you came out in the middle in the present moment, kind of like a blue book exam, is this kind of thing where I think people naturally pull from what's inside and they pull from the outside. They pull for like the way the room sounds, the
Hmm.
people around them, the feeling they had, what they heard today, what they heard before, what's in your subconscious. That stuff comes out, and it's that's what where the beauty is, I think, in art, or just in being a human being alive in the moment.
Yeah, I love that. When you're speaking, so you speak juicy, which I love because all of a sudden I can put myself there, like with the blue book and with your students and in the room where musicians are pulling from the energy, from their subconscious, from what they want to create, their intention, as you mentioned, all of those things. So I love that you mentioned intention too, because I think that that's another creative power that we have that a lot of people don't lock into if they think they've got to follow some sort of formula. So you can have a formula for success, right? But if it looks like everyone else's, you're not going to have this significantly unique and wondrous life. But if you have an intention to be authentic in your art, authentic in your expression, creative, learn from your mistakes and love them, right? All of these different pieces, that intention has an energy to it, has a magic to it. So if you're wanting to create healing in a song or in a book, that's what ends up coming out. If you're wanting to create power, if you're wanting to create laughter, if you're wanting to really tug at the heartstrings, like I'm working with an author this afternoon who has nationally a story that I think everyone should read, and it tugs on the heartstrings. So he lost a daughter in a school shooting, and it's something that
Mm.
is really really tender to so many people, because here's this young little 6-year old full of life and promise and beauty and joy and learning, and then nothing, right? So his intention is to bring forth healing, to have more of an understanding of the grieving process and what happens when someone steals your narrative. Because he had someone who says your daughter wasn't real, she wasn't alive, this is all a hoax. And
Oh
so we
yeah.
had millions of people who were saying that. And so here's the crazy thing is his intention is not to create more hate. His intention
Hmm.
is to create so much more compassion and understanding, open a conversation that the whole nation needs. So intention is this beautiful thing. What have you found with your artists and their intention?
Well, I think what I love is like the aspirational. kind of effect of like if you get into the music that's very kind of, I don't know, it's world building, but it's like if you think of it, a good example of this type of music is kind of like Stevie Wonder, and when he did the songs like in the Key of Life, that album is very spiritual. If you think about like Bob Marley and the Wailers, they had like this energy that was very spiritual in the music. It's got a beat that gets people moving. And the same thing, like when we get into funk and soul music, you could have something that has a beat, but has like a heart story or
Yeah.
has an aspirational story that's kind of like gospel or something. It feels like it's more than just a song. It's actually trying to elevate. And so when you do a song that suddenly can elevate the mood, and you can think about being music, if you're a musician and you're in front of the crowd, you play that song with that beat and that feeling. You can see that people come with the candles come out, the people with that wave. You can see the immediate reaction to the sound waves and the rhythms you're putting out. So you get immediate feedback as an artist. And a lot of times musicians, we kind of live on that. We
Yeah.
live on the fact that we get this immediate feedback from the art that we create in the moment. And that's kind of, I guess if you speak as an author, you could get that when you're public speaking. But
Oh.
musicians, we can get that in that kind of crowd situation, which, is kind of hard to come down from.
Yeah, it becomes addictive, doesn't it?
Yeah,
We're
we have to learn how to
more
process it and handle it in the correct way so we don't hurt ourselves.
I would agree, and that we can continue to live a productive life, but not, just on that addiction alone. I would agree. Wow, you're so fun to talk to. I'm really enjoying this.
Well, one of the things about publishing, I think it's like what happened to music. Like, in publishing and in music, what has happened today is a lot of people can self-publish music. Like we're independent. We can go and we can put it out and we can get it out across the world without having to have the gatekeeper, right? But I understand a lot of times in order to get, like a lot of work out, you still necessarily want to maybe use a producer or go to a studio and have some kind of gatekeeper. So I
Mm.
guess in publishing, what's the kind of the breadth of that? Like how much of it do you need to go through your beta groups and your publishers and people who are mentors and structures of publishing companies versus independent publication?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it's fascinating world out there. And over the last 5 years alone, publishing has completely shifted and changed. And so there's good news, and then there's also hard news. But if you know what to navigate, then you're in really great shape. So one of the things that happened was the advent of Amazon. And Amazon really was a huge game changer because traditional publishers, which had been doing the same thing over and over for decades, if not half a century, all of a sudden facing a competitor that was able to control pricing and distribution and other things. And when my New York Times bestseller came out, The Witness Wore Red, there was all this stuff that was going on. Like this woman that I was able to write with about her story, she changed the culture of 10,000 people. She went up against a prophet pedophile that had been in the news. Like she had courage where most people didn't at all. And the book was called The Witness Wore Red, and the publishers were on fire about it. We had an agent. We were in New York. There was all kinds of beautiful things that were happening. We had a 2-hour Dateline special, and immediately hit New York Times. But our publisher was in a battle with Amazon, and they lost. And Amazon said to anyone that went on and was looking for the book, they said, "Oh, it can be delivered after 2 weeks, be available after 2 weeks." Well, when people are on fire and they're seeing a Dateline special and they're seeing all this
Yeah,
and
they
they
want
want
to
to
know.
know about this woman, they want it now. They want to know it's going to show up on their doorstep in a couple of days. And so Amazon really was a huge game changer. And so if you know that, then you also know how to navigate a little bit better. Was fascinating to me, which I absolutely love, because as you know, for centuries, history was written by the victors. And so those were the ones that held the power and the money and everything else. But today, with social media and especially with the changes in publishing, like anyone can publish a book. And so you can get an ISBN number and be published overnight. So
Hmm.
then the question becomes, there's traditional publishing and there's self-publishing and there's something in the middle called indie publishing, which you can get all the services of traditional publishers, but you get to keep your own rights and they don't get up and drive away. And so there's pros and cons of every single type of publishing. What's beautiful is there's no reason why anyone couldn't be published who has a story to share. Then it
Yeah.
becomes, what is wisest for the book that I'm writing at this time? Like, how quickly do I want to get it out to market? Do I have other programs and things that I want to do along with it? Then you probably want to be self or indie published. If you still are worried about having a great reputation and you want a Simon and Schuster or you want an Hachette, then you've got to get an agent and you've got to do a book proposal and you'll go through those old-fashioned steps. And I just call it old-fashioned, but
Yeah. It
people
takes longer,
still,
right? It's
yeah,
a lot longer. Like it's more bureaucratic, right?
yeah, it's more bureaucratic. There's over a year, because it usually takes about a year and a quarter for, once you've signed the contract for your book, to actually hit the stands. But it's really nice to have a large traditional publisher behind you because of all their amazing services, marketing, distribution. So
Yeah.
it depends on the book. So what's really cool about it that you've probably found in music is that, every book has its platform. Every book has the place that it can launch from and really enjoy and be able to be successful at. So it's important to know your audience, to make sure you're expressing why this project is so important to you, and then what do you want to do with it? Because timing matters, your intention matters, your visibility matters. And every step along the way is really important to keep those things in mind. And your book, no matter what, can be successful.
It's kind of like the lesson I think musicians learned. Like they want to put all the work into writing the album, but if you go independent, then you've got to do marketing, you've got to do licensing, you've got to go and book all this stuff that the record company used to do. So now you have to do all the things that they used to do. You've
Hmm.
got to get it into the stores. You got to show up, do the marketing campaign, make sure it's getting to the right distribution, making sure you're getting the money coming back the way it's supposed to. It's like now suddenly you're in charge of all that. And then,
Hmm.
well, I want to write the next album. So, well, you might have to actually stay on this album as a project longer than be able to jump to the next project. And
Hmm.
so I think that's where some artists, well, I don't want to get into all that because I'm a musician and I don't want to do all that work. Well, once you're independent, you do have to do all that work
Yeah.
unless you're going to go hire people to do it. Then you're going to lose the cut. The whole point of being independent was to try to keep more of that cut. If you start farming it out, well, maybe you should go back to the label. But you have to figure out how much you're willing to do, I think. And is it the same situation, like how much you're willing to put into all that?
And that's the thing is, what is your budget? How much of that management do you want to do? That's why indie publishers have been growing by leaps and bounds, because they can do everything that traditional publishers do, but you do have to pay for every one of those services. So there's no right or wrong way to get a book out there, but there is what works and what doesn't work. Just like there's
Mm-hmm.
no right or wrong way to write a book, but there are ways that really, really work and ways that don't. And so to educate yourself before you just plunge, I think is really important. It sounds like in both music and in books. How are you going to get this music out there? And I think too, is it a big reveal? Is there a demand for what you have to offer? Sometimes it's worth it for you to have someone that will do all of those things, because you can continue to keep your creativity and you get to use all their distribution. And but it's a matter of leverage, isn't it? It's a matter
Yeah,
of
yeah,
honoring your work and then deciding how much leverage you want to have in different aspects.
well, there's so much content. Like we're living in such a massive content world. It's hard to get your content pushed to the top or pushed into a area where it would be comfortable. Like it's done a lot of times with musicians, we learn that we can live with a certain fan base. Like if you're independent, you could live with 200,000 fans actually buying your records. If you own the masters and you own everything, you can make more money selling 200,000 than being with a record label and doing like 900,000, because the
Isn't that
amount of money that they give you is like they're looking for you to hit like 5 million, and then you're never going to hit it, and then you're never going to get paid. But if you actually control it at 200,000, you really realize I got 200,000. I'm gonna tour to that base. I'm gonna offer merch to that base, and I actually can make a living, and I could actually maybe go 10 years or 15 years in that world. Where
wow?
in the big label, if you don't hit the 1 million, 5 million, you're done.
Hmm.
And so that's where the difference is. A lot of times in the indie world, you can survive longer. Like as an artist, you can actually be a working artist and actually do what you want as an artist, and actually, you know, it can work. And so it's a matter of like, well, maybe you're not the number one person in the world, but you're actually a working musician and you're playing gigs and you're getting things done. So I think
You're
that's kind of have to look
living
at
your
it.
passion. Yeah.
Yeah, how you want to do it.
I love it. I love that there's so many choices these days, which is great. Because there's a lot more freedom and creativity than there used to be in some ways, as long as we don't let those stories and that perfectionism get to us, right?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of like you can realize that your dream, like, is your dream to make the $1 million, or is it your dream to be heard?
Hmm.
Because if you're trying to make the $1 million, like, so you think you're going to get heard, is it really the artist? Really, is it the $1 million, or is it that I want to be respected, I want to be heard, I want to be able to play for the next 10 years
Yeah.
in clubs and do that? Like maybe the $1 million doesn't do that. Maybe it's actually the passion and these other things that don't do that thing. And that's where I think people sometimes they misalign. Like, what is it actually that you want?
Mhm. Wow, that's beautiful. I could talk to you for hours. This is fun.
So if people go to your website, yourinspiredstory.com, what happens when they go there? What do you offer there?
Well, at Your Inspired Story, there's a number of things. I have several free programs because I get a lot of people who are, in that stage of, do I really have something worth sharing and would anybody ever want to read it? So I have a couple of free programs, Author Unleashed, Crushing Your Fear, and Author Unleashed, Going Pro. And then I have a number of online programs that actually will help you to build a better story. Teaches you how to master brain outline with both left and right brain, tell the juicy stories where people can't put your book down, and they're telling 100 people about it and they read it in 2 days. Like, that's the kind of story we want to craft and create. So
Mm-hmm.
I have those programs available. One of my favorite ways of teaching and getting the word out is my Inspired Writers Retreat. We just take a small handful of authors, 15 or less. We're cuddled up in a cabin. We have a chef that takes care of all of our food needs, and we just get to work on our books. And it is so profound. Like one of
Yeah,
my,
that sounds good.
we just had one last week, and one of my authors said, like, you need to say, beware of empowerment. Work on that imposter syndrome. We work on making sure your outline is really great and it's unique to you, and that it's the message is distilled down, and that you know who you're writing to. Like, we ask all the deepest questions that a lot of people don't ask when they're writing, and then it takes them 5 or 10 or 20 years to write their book. Well, sometimes we don't have enough time to get a book out to the planet where it deserves, and so we want to make sure we accelerate the process. We also have some things I think you would like that you can't find in the classroom, some experiential exercises that, like, creates from within inside of you this juicy author who can immerse people in your stories, so that you don't only educate and inspire and motivate, but you can actually transform your readers to the point
Mm-hmm.
where they see themselves inside your story and recognize that they can make similar, really courageous choices in their life. And so we love that. So it's one of my favorite things. I do it at least a couple times a year on a beautiful turquoise lake. And that's one of the things we offer on the website. I also do executive coaching. So I got a lot of busy creators, as you would be well aware. They're working their day jobs and they're wanting to write, or they're speakers or healers or artists or motivators, and they know that this is the next step on their journey to be able to reach a wider audience, to up level their career, to be able to make profound impact. So I love to work with those kinds of creators. We do one-on-one. I also have an amazing editor, and we can work two-on-one and accelerate the process even faster. So there's a lot of services that are on there that are available. And if you know you have a story to write and you're so unsure how to write it, but you're passionate about it, like it keeps you up at night, you know that this is your path, then we want to hear from you. We want to help you be successful, because that is my favorite thing on the planet.
Well, I believe that you're offering a really good service. It's just impeccable. It's just, I think what a lot of people need is that kick, the kind of Kickstarter idea. They kind of kick them into gear, because some people, they just get into this procrastination, or they don't know what to do. And having somebody who's a guide, the coach kind of method is that's what it seems to, is the thing today, is to find the person that's going to align with the way you want to work, and get yourself into a better position, make yourself more marketable, make yourself feel better about what you're doing. It seems like that's what you're offering people, and that's I encourage everybody who's listening that's in that mindset, that wants to do this, that there's a creator, to click on that link. It's going to be fully clickable when we're published. We're on all the platforms for podcasting. You can watch or listen to a podcast. They will be available tomorrow. We were live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. Those will be immediately available. After the program, the Facebook and the YouTube are up there, but the rest of them will be available tomorrow. And thank you again for being on the Familipticos podcast.
Well, I really appreciate it. This has been a great pleasure. You're one of the most enjoyable hosts that I've ever had the opportunity to work with. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. We appreciate that. That's always good to have that kind of encouragement. But thank you again, and have a great night. And we'll get this out to you with the landing page. And thank you again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Take good care.